Or
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Kiwi.
well, now we're visiting the interesting space where science and art meet. We're going to be talking about something called the Hyperbolic Crochet Coral Reef. It's a project by the Institute for Figuring coming out of Los Angeles, and the Crochet Reef resides at the intersection of mathematics, marine biology, handicraft, and community art practice. Who would have ever have thought that all of those things could be mashed together? Well, it is the mastermind of Margaret Wertheim and her sister Christine as well. And Margaret joins us from the States today. Hello to you, Margaret.
Hello, Glenn. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, now you're a science writer. That's your background, isn't it?
That's right, yes.
So
Yes, I studied physics and mathematics at university and thought I would become a physicist, but ended up becoming a science writer instead.
And would it be fair to say that you had a hobby on the side, which was doing crochet?
Well, I did grow up doing knitting and sewing and all of those girly things. Both my sister and I were taught these things by our mother when we were growing up, and so I had handicraft in my background. But it was funny, before I came to do the Crochet Reef, I hadn't actually been doing any knitting or crochet for about 20 years. And it was wonderful when I discovered this hyperbolic crochet. I thought it would be a brilliant way to get back into crochet and handicraft in general, and combine that with my love of mathematics.
What does hyperbolic actually mean when we're talking about, well, I guess the art form of crochet?
Well, hyperbolic geometry is an alternative geometry to the two kinds of geometry that all of your listeners will know about, and that's plane or Euclidean geometry, which we all learn about in school, and spherical geometry, which is what we see on the surface of the Earth. And it turns out there's another kind of geometry called hyperbolic geometry, which is, mathematically speaking, it's the opposite to a sphere. So where a sphere has positive curvature and a flat plane has zero curvature, hyperbolic geometry has negative curvature. And it turns out that these negative curvature spaces are realized widely throughout nature, particularly in the marine world, in the structures of corals and sponges and nudibranchs and kelps. So wherever you see those kind of undulating, frilly, crenellated forms,
yes,
they are versions of hyperbolic geometry. They're not mathematically perfect ones, but they are variants of that. So, and it, it's one of those interesting things. It turns out that, while nature has been making these hyperbolic structures for hundreds of millions of years, human beings didn't know how to do it until 1997, when a mathematician at Cornell, Dr. Dinah Taimina, came along and she said, well, you know what, I can actually make those forms in crochet. And that was a real important breakthrough for mathematicians to be able to literally see these models and hold them in their hands. But it's funny that mathematicians didn't know how to do it, but sea slugs have been doing it since the Silurian age.
Exactly. Well, they're very smart sea slugs. So did you see the link there straight away between actually putting together an art project out of crochet in the form of a coral reef and these hyperbolic forms?
Well, what happened was that I discovered Dr. Taimina's work in 2003, and my sister and I took up this hyperbolic crochet, and we started making a bunch of these models, just as purely mathematical models, and we did that for about 2 years. And then my sister actually said, look, after 2 years of doing this pure mathematically, she said that she was sick of doing the pure mathematical ones, and she wanted to branch out and not do the mathematically perfect pattern. And as soon as she did that, as soon as she started, as it were, introducing deviations and modifications from the perfect mathematical pattern, the models immediately began to look a lot more organic, because, of course, nature doesn't have to stick to mathematical perfection. And so Christine started making a bunch of these things which were sort of, as it were, from the mathematical perspective, a bit wonky and a bit wobbly. And she also started doing them with, fluffy coloured yarns and more natural-looking colours. And immediately we had a bunch of them sitting on our coffee table, and they started to look like a coral reef. And after Christine had been doing these for literally about a week, we looked at them on our coffee table and said, oh, they look like a coral reef. We could crochet a coral reef.
Yeah.
And this was in 2005, and that was an important year for our understanding of coral reefs, because scientists around that time were really coming to understand that these massive bleaching events that are happening in coral reefs all over the world were primarily due to global warming and the rising sea temperatures.
Yeah.
And we'd grown up in Queensland, which is where the Great Barrier Reef is, and so we thought we could, get a few people involved with us to crochet a coral reef as a way to do something beautiful, learn about mathematics and marine biology, and to hopefully bring some awareness to the devastation of coral reefs due to global warming and now also ocean acidification.
Yeah, so there is a strong environmental motivation behind putting together these artworks and getting them exhibited around the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a huge part of the huge motivation for us to do this, as a community project, was to try to raise community awareness about the devastating plight of coral reefs due to these environmental disasters. So, I mean, we could have just done it as a little thing on our coffee table and done it at home, but we thought, if we get other people involved, A, we can produce something bigger, but B, the whole point of this is to raise awareness about the ecological tragedy that's going on. But we thought that it would, maybe there'd be a couple of dozen other people who'd be interested in doing this with us. And 5 years later, there are thousands and thousands of people all over the world doing it. We've had exhibitions in, London, New York, Chicago, Ireland, Melbourne. There's about to be an exhibition of some people who are doing a local Melbourne reef at the Burringer Community Centre, and our own reef, the one that we spearhead, which is the, as it were, worldwide one, is going to open in October at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and it's the first time ever the Smithsonian would have shown an art show.
And you're calling these, of course, satellite reefs as they sort of spawn around the world. Is there any interest from New Zealand at the moment in this?
There have been some people at one of the museums in New Zealand who've done some workshops to do. They had a couple of workshops to do some, but I don't think they've gone ahead with actually doing a local New Zealand reef. We'd love to have somebody do it. It takes quite a bit of resources in the sense it's very time-consuming. It doesn't necessarily require, huge amounts of money, but it does require a lot of people's time. And so, in order for there to be local reefs, someone or some group of people or some organisation basically has to be willing to put in a lot of labour to organise this. It's like any large-scale collective project. There is a huge amount of time, not only on the part of the people who make the models, but just simply organising it all and curating it and putting it all together.
Yeah.
Large-scale art projects look phenomenal because basically a huge amount of labour and thought has gone into constructing the totality from the thousands of individual pieces.
I mean, I'm fascinated by them, about how beautiful they are and how intricate they are. Do you think a lot of people are fascinated by them at the level of, like an amazing train set with all the hills and bridges and buildings and little people? Do you think it's kind of at that level that it draws people in?
Definitely. I mean, I think there's two levels on which it draws people in, and one is just the sheer amount of it.
Yeah.
There's thousands, and when we have the big exhibitions, there are, maybe 10,000 pieces, and it's just the sheer amount of it just is mind-blowing. But then we have people who do extremely intricate, fine works that, things that are masterpieces of handicraft, people who do incredibly fine things with beading or do incredibly fine crochet that's, on the level of lace work.
Yeah.
And so these things, they are, incredible, intricate, jewelled masterpieces. And the whole, as you rightly point out, Glenn, makes this kind of landscape which has, both large-scale structure and also incredibly fine details. And you can just, like a real coral reef, you just feel like you're exploring a little, quite a big universe now.
Well, it certainly is wonderful, and I hope that it gets people motivated here in New Zealand to start putting some of this together. People can find out a whole lot more up on the website, crochetcoralreef.org, and there is some fantastic talks that you've given on TED as well that people can find on YouTube and the TED website. Thanks so much, Margaret.
Thanks very much, Glenn.
It is Margaret Wertheim joining us from the States there this morning, talking about the Hyperbolic Crochet Coral Reef.